Hey everybody, welcome back to Ready Steady Podcast. This is episode 44, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Barry to talk about board games. How you doing, Barry?
Hello. Happy to be here as always. So this is our first one post Expo wrap up.
Correct, yep.
And we did promise a new format. What have we come up with?
Shorter. We're just going to talk about two games.
Yeah.
Two games which I've got right here. One lighter game and one heavier game. Games that one game we've been very excited about, and one game that came out at the expo that we were excited to check out. So you will find that in the show notes. I will of course have chapters, so you can skip straight to the game that you want to hear us talk about. And very quickly before we get into that, we're not doing a new section in this episode. If you're devastated and missed the news section, leave a comment and let us know, and we'll take that into consideration under advisement. And then just very quickly as well, in the last episode, we said that Todoku was designed by Matteo Cerisa, who is in fact the artist. So this is a journalistic integrity correction. They are the artist, and the designer is Sandro Blasic. So
my bad.
We've corrected that. So now you can uncancel us and subscribe again. We'll go straight into Threaded.
Yeah, so Threaded was a game that we spoke about ahead of the expo. I thought it looked very interesting and looked potentially quite mean with what it offered in terms of the genre. But this is published by Osprey Games, designed by Ellie Dix, and the artist on this one is Maria Surdekan. And so this new format, games that we both played and know a bit about, unlike previous times we were just talking about what I might have played that you haven't, or you might have played that I haven't, and just hope that our tastes align or knowledge aligns. But this is a game that I've played just a couple of times now, so played once at 2-player and once at 3-player.
Yep, and I got this to the table twice as well at 5 players and then again at 3 players.
Yeah, and it's a game that does play from 2 to 5. There's no solo mode to get to grips with it. But
before we get into it, I've got to cut Barry off because I forgot to put this in the show notes. That's my bad. Barry did purchase this game from Osprey Games at the convention. I was very kindly given a review copy by Osprey Games. So thanks to them for supporting us with this review copy so that Barry and I can both play the game and talk about it here on the show.
I used my hard-earned cash. Mike used his charm and wit. Normally gets smaller games, but we'll leave that. So this is a game, the newest game from Ellie Dix, and she seems to be, or Diz, I'm not sure if she's Spanish or not, but Diz,
English,
maybe.
It is Dix.
It is Dix, yep. So starting to, she'd done a lot of games for Dark Imp Games. I'm not 100% sure the relationship there, if she was like the founder or publisher or CEO or something of that, and they focused on family first games, and you know to mix the claims, some were fun, some were like Karate Grannies, and like nobody liked that one. And the art, which if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify with the video, you can see on the front there is I mentioned Maria Surdekan. And I feel like she's more than a little underutilised in this game. You can find her Instagram. She's got a load of stuff up on there. It's really interesting, really nice. And somebody that we might see more in the future. I think this is her first board game design, but based on the Bargello mathematical embroidery style from the Bargello Palace in the whatever century. I'm unsure. Are we getting a visitor there, Mike?
Yeah, sorry. Barry's doing his best to keep on task while I'm making all sorts of noises that I've definitely cut out in the edit, but only because my wife has just let the cat into the office. He's clearly sat outside crying and upsetting her, so now he's here.
Once in.
Yeah.
But what type of game is Threaded? So Threaded is a worker placement first game. It's got elements of set collection. Players are trying to maximise the points they get from completing these Bargello tapestries when they're running their workshop. To that end, players are going to collect resources which have a timing requirement for using them in the correct order. Obviously, you can't just stitch anything into a tapestry. And then, as players, you're going to attempt to improve some of the actions you can take with one-time use equipment, all in a very sort of tight time frame, as a race to finish the first 5 tapestries will end the game, and you're hopefully able to multiply your score for the commissions that you've earned. So I'd say that this is a very, or at least a fairly underutilized thematic niche, stitching, and giving players a studio to run even. Games like Patchwork or Rococo deal with patterns and sewing, but in a much less direct fashion. Indeed, I can't think of any games that are as cute as a button in the presentation of their theme. And if you like those puns and need a little more, then get thready for the rest of this podcast. Anyway.
I will say,
how many subscribers have we lost?
Yeah, I'm actually just watching the counter go down. No, but I was going to say, one of the nice things, because we don't mention this in the review, but one of the nice things that it does do is it gives you a little make your own first player marker, which you can do using the Bargello system, which is really nice. And Leanne did that for us, and it was very cute to have that.
I also made mine one evening. It was fun. So like all the best worker placement games, players have to compete for limited number of action spaces each round. That number varies by player count. Typically, fewer than 5 players, you're going to be losing 1 space at most of the action stations. And then players are going to put out all their assistants, so that's 3 at 3, 4, 5 players and 4 at 2 players. And once they're all out, then you're going to rip what you sew. Brilliant. And then resolve the actions A through F, so in a specific sequence or alphabetical order, with a clever thing they've done with the boards. And then what I'm trying to say. So the order in which you put your workers out isn't the same as the order that you're going to pick them back up. It's a fixed order. You do not have free reign to trigger when you want to do that action. It all happens sequentially.
Exactly right. And this is my favorite version of worker placement. And so if you've seen Bus, or if you know the Thesaurus, which we were playing recently, or indeed Tribune, or Empire's Age of Discovery, you'll have seen this system in all of those games, and it creates a really nice tension because during the worker placement space, because even though players are placing their workers into the board, and you're like, all right, I'm not going to get first choice in there, you can still maybe hope that they don't take the thing you want, and there comes a decision where you're like, am I going to place this worker because I want to bet on the thing I want still being available, or because something is better than nothing, or am I going to write off that action as a potential option and go somewhere where that might prove more beneficial, or even somewhere that's more luck based and hope that the luck pays off, right? I think it's a really nice system, and so it's my favorite worker placement system.
Yep. Yes, as opposed to knowing exactly what a player's done when they've gone there, you won't know until it's time to pick them back up. So there's a few different systems. I probably prefer I don't know if I prefer. Each game's everything's got pluses and minuses. It depends on the game, right?
Yeah, this system certainly leans more into the tension, right? It leans much more into the tension of not knowing what exactly is going to happen until that moment of resolution, which is, certainly a vibe.
Yeah. First one. So, one arguably interesting element of Threaded is that the board is modular, right? So, not in the sense that the board changes game to game, or you can have one thing in one game and take it away in another game, but that each worker placement space is its own little board, right? Its own bit of cardboard.
Yeah. So the game is six boards. It comes with 6 boards, and they're all an individual mini board, and you can arrange them on the table however you want. But because you're always activating them in the same order, you want to have some sort of sensible layout to the table, so you're sort of progressing through them in the right order.
Yep. So, I mean, part of me appreciates that for allowing it to fit on odd table sizes, smaller table sizes, you can move it around. But my first game, I was following the instructions, like, I could put this here, put this here, put this here, and then it was just a bit of a pain because that wasn't the shape of my table, and then I had to kind of rearrange it, and then the actions always resolve A through F, and so the clever thing for the game is, the first worker space begins with an A, the second worker space begins with a B, C, D, E, F, so you know exactly where you're going through, but that wasn't immediately apparent during the setup. From your second game onward, no problem, you'll get that without any bother, but I don't know, like, it was just, I'd prefer to unfold a board and 90% of the work is done for me, to be honest.
Yeah, and, I think I was going to say that it's not a long setup, even with the modular boards, but and I agree, like, the modular boards, it's there's a little bit of uncertainty, and also there's a little bit of, like, awkwardness as well, because one of them has a big cube tower on it, and you want to put that somewhere where it's not in the way and that doesn't block people's sight. But one of the nice, on the flip side, one of the nice things about modular boards is that you can fit it in a much smaller box, right? Because it doesn't have a big square folding board in it. You could make a folding board that fit in here, but then it'd be much too small, probably. So it's like, it's a trade-off.
Yeah. You spoke about, in terms of setting up as well, you spoke about having to, you don't have to, right? If you don't want to stitch your own first player marker, there is a little cardboard first player marker in the box.
That's true.
Perfectly serviceable. Yeah. Right? But an odd decision, for my mind, was to try and make the game colourblind friendly, and the game does rely on colours a lot for knowing which threads you have and little cubes and the corresponding colour they match with on cards. That each one has an individual icon. Now, they're all quite similar, but they are unique. The game provides you a bunch of stickers with different patterns to put on those coloured resource cubes. In theory, great, right? Even we had to stick them on ourselves. Fine, I did it. Spent an hour or so just sticking, pick, stick. But in practice, these patterns are really, the cubes are really small, the stickers are really small, the patterns are quite similar, particularly at a distance, and they're also only on one side of the cube. So if you are the player that needs these patterns to help differentiate what colours you're getting, my first question is, who's putting the colours on the cubes? Like, if you don't know what colour's what if you stick them on the wrong cubes? But part of the game is pulling cubes out of a bag, and then you're putting them into the matching colour slots. They're only on one side, so like normally you're just seeing the blank sides. It's not really a problem for me. I didn't have a problem with it, but it just seems, if you have to turn them face up, it's going to become time consuming, it's going to be a little frustrating, and it just becomes a little less accessible than it seems.
I agree. I think that I largely put the stickers on the cubes because I had them, and because I guess it is a cute design. It's the Bargello stitching, right? So it's sort of designed to fit in with the rest of that. But in a practical sense, because they're only on one side of the cube, and you don't want to sit and like fidget with the cubes it's quite a quick game, it's even at 5 players, it's 5 players who've never played before with a teach, it's 90 minutes, or less. So it's a quick game, so we're not fussing with the cubes, and actually that sort of admin phase where you're setting up the cubes, we're trying to get through as quickly as possible. So I don't think it really, I feel like it's sort of an afterthought towards accessibility, and possibly the iconography just needed to be a little bit more distinct. I don't know. I mean, because the cubes are coming out of bag, you can't really make them different shapes or anything. So no. I guess it's better than nothing, but
I don't actually know how that problem's solved. Like, I think also the colours are quite tonally similar, or
They're
I don't
quite
know what it is, like
muted.
contrast hue. There's I can't remember what makes things more difficult for colorblind people. Whether they're the same contrast, the same hue, the same brightness. There's something in there that makes it worse than others. And I don't know if actually the colours are picked in a way that is thematically the best for Bargello styling or for accessibility purposes, right? I don't know.
Right, and that's
So
a bit of a
if
trade-off
anybody
as well, because obviously there are multiple different kinds of colorblind, and I don't know if in trying to make a game completely colorblind friendly for every variation, you would end up creating something that looks very strange. So I suppose iconography and distinctive patterns is the best way around it, but in a case where you're blind pulling things out of bag where you can't use different shapes, actual tactile shapes, obviously printing distinct iconography on all sides of a cube would be much too expensive. So I don't know whether there's a good solution for that, or whether, and it's very possible upon investigation that we would find that actually making the colors distinct enough for colorblind people and still thematic and vibrant or appealing would be very simple. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't think of a good answer to it, but I definitely noted that the stickers were face down more often than not.
Yeah. And you don't want to be. There's enough cubes, especially in the higher player count games. There's enough cubes coming out the bag that you don't want to be sitting and putting them all to the side with the stitching on, and also then the stitching is so similar. Like, it's really hard to sort of get a sense of the distinction just by eyeballing. So anyway, bit of a swing and a miss with that, but at least they put something in.
It's there. If you're somebody that is colorblind and appreciates that kind of accessibility, you can let us know what your thoughts are on what's the best solution.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting from an accessibility point of view. Like, I don't know what other games really do. Sometimes it doesn't matter because they're your cubes or whatever, but sometimes for resources it does matter, and I don't know how to. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the industry standard is, really.
Well, I don't know if there is an industry standard, and that might be why this is a topic that comes up again and again. But yeah, if you've got any expertise in this, certainly do let us know in the comments below. But, what you are trying to do in the game is collect these different threads, and of course collect the correct threads as well, the correct colors, in order to pay for your tapestry cards. And when you've collected and paid for 5 tapestries, you end the game at the end of that round. So the minute someone gets to 5, that's the final round, then it's the end of the game. But the tapestries themselves are worth nothing on their own. So if you beeline to 5 as quickly as possible, you won't actually score any points. You also need to collect commission cards, which will show patterns and colors and different objectives, which you'll have in secret in your play area. They're kept face down. And at the end of the game, you'll flip those over and people will finally find out what your actual score is. The commissions matching the tapestries are multipliers. So if you've got 5 blue tapestries and something that scores you 2 points for each blue tapestry, you're going to get 10 points for that. Most points wins.
Yep. And so the actions you can take in this game allow you to get those commissions, which are effectively scoring objectives. You can pick up equipment, which modifies some of the other actions you can take, but they're all one-time use. So all your equipment, you only get a single use out of it, and then you have to discard it. Mm-hmm. And then there's 2 separate resource gathering spaces, one where you get a fixed amount and one where you're not sure, right? A bit of luck on those ones.
Thematically, one is you're going to the store and picking out exactly what you want, but because you're paying full price, you can only have a few things. And the other, you're going to the bargain bin and just grabbing whatever's there, but you get loads of stuff because it's dirt cheap.
Yeah. And then the final action in a round is where you'll be able to claim a tapestry pattern, and along with making a tapestry. Mm-hmm. There's other things you can do in that spot. Indeed, that final spot is the most flexible. There's 4 different actions you can take there, and you'll get to do 2 for every worker you have there. But those spots are also super tight. I mean, there's only 4 spots in a 5-player game, or 3 spots at lower player counts. Mm-hmm. So I've got problems with most of the action spaces for a variety of reasons. The commission spot, which is where you're scoring your points, is a blind draw. You don't know what you're getting. So you take 2 off the top, you keep 1, you discard the other. You want to get them early because you want to know what you want to be scoring. And generally you're limited to only getting 1 of them a turn. You know, you're probably not going to be able to claim 2 commission spots early on because everybody wants them. Yeah. So it makes planning quite hard for what you want to do for the rest of which resource do you want to gather and which patterns do you want to collect, because you won't know what's going to score you things until really towards the end of the game with them. To my games, they went 6 or 7 rounds. I think you think it's shorter at higher player counts. Is that?
Yeah, we found that in the 1 5-player game we played, it was 1 round per player and then the game was over.
I think the tightest version of the game is 4-player because all the 5-player slots are still sealed up.
Right.
So there's less opportunity, I think, at 4-player than 5 even. So, but anyway, if you're collecting these commissions and you're collecting these other things, you're only going to maybe at best have a round, if you wanted to spend that action, to switch out what you've got to try and improve your scoring at the end. But it's really just a crapshoot of what you find in there. And even if you get something that matches what you've got, it might not match anything else that's out. So it's kind of the trade-off is tricky there.
Yeah, and it's an interesting dilemma because, like Barry said, you want to get these early so you have something to work towards. And there also really isn't an alternative viable strategy, because if your strategy was to get the tapestries first and then hunt for commissions, well, you'd be so close to ending the game at that point, and you'd still then have to go back for a 5th tapestry. So you'd sort of want to sit on 4 for a while. We can talk a bit more about the commissions in the summary, because I feel like this, for me, is the major, or the most important part of the game.
And so then the resource gathering spots, thematically, what Mike described made sense. You're buying what you want, or you're just fishing out the bin. The resources that aren't taken from the shop get dropped into this little cube tower. So if you're familiar with Shogun or Wallenstein or Amerigo, you drop them in and not everything comes out. So this is seeded at the start of the game, but you don't know what's going to come out of it. The difference between guaranteeing getting 3, you'll get to take everything that comes out, but it'll go round in order for the amount of players that are there. So I take 1, Mike takes 1, player 3 takes 1, player 4 takes 1, then I take 1, round and round. So you might get 5 or 6 resources, depending on what's fallen out. But more than likely, you're getting 3 or 4 again, right? So 3 or 4 things.
This, once again, is definitely directly correlated to player count, because I observed that in the 5-player game, the odds and ends action space with the tower was much more generous, because I think they add 6 cubes to the store for each player, and players are only ever taking 3. Or maybe, is it as many as 6?
No, it's not that fixed. So 2 to 3 players has 12, 4 players has 15, 5 players has 18.
Well, with the 18 going into that tower, the bargain bin was so generous.
Yeah. So I mean, again, you don't know what's coming out. So you're taking your chances a bit. Sometimes what's in the shop, there isn't things there that you want, so you have to go to the odds and ends to try and find it. Or there's a third way of getting threads, which is from this final action, where you can spend a scrap to get the sort of scraps you need. But I found that 2 and 3 players, certainly, that tower, the first turn it was seeded, really good place to go. And then after that, unless you're the only player there, you were getting less than just going to the shop. So either you would only go there if you were hoping that something would fall out that you couldn't get at the shop, or you would just have to hope that nobody else was coming in behind you. If it was the final action of the round, it's probably pretty good for resources. Otherwise, it's not. So I don't mind those kind of decisions, right? It matters And I don't mind that action spot changes at different player counts as well. That seems reasonable. But I don't know. I just was never... The problem for us was rarely having enough resources. It was sometimes having the right resources.
Yeah, no, I largely agree, and you'll find out why volume is not as much of a problem when we as we continue through this review. But we found that a lot of the people who are playing into the bargain bin action space were going there either because already the store was full and they couldn't get into the store, or and to be fair, there's a number of things in the game that require you to just pay thread. And so sometimes having some spares anyway is quite useful. You need to pay threads to pick up tapestries. You need to pay threads to go to the wild action space and things like that. But the other thing is that people would be looking into the tower and they'd be like, "Is this against the rules? Can I look into the top of the tower, see if the thing I need's in there?"
Same.
You know?
Yeah.
And we're like, "Well, it doesn't explicitly say you can't, so go for it." You know, there's no guarantee it'll fall out.
Very true. And yeah, like gaining and storing those threads is one of the core parts of the game. In fact, I'd argue the only real puzzle you have any sort of control over, right? But when you're getting threads is one of the less intuitive part of the rules. So you can only rearrange thread when you gain thread. And thematically, you can either store up to 4 threads in your basket, or you can put thread on the needle to start sewing, but then you have to do it coming in from either side off the needle, and you've got to take things off the same way you put them on. So they have to come off either end of that needle. So I don't know if that's a hard one for people to imagine what I'm talking about.
Yeah, just imagine 6 cubes in a line, and you put them onto the end or take them off the end, so cubes can get stuck in the middle. And each tapestry costs exactly 3 threads, and you need to have those 3 threads that you can remove from your needle in that order. So if you get the right 3 threads but they're stuck in the middle, that's a problem. If you get the right 3 threads but they're in the wrong order on the wrong end of the needle, that's a problem. So managing the order of those threads, while not supremely difficult, is enough of a puzzle that it can mess up some of your action optimization.
Yeah, and I made it very clear, particularly in the second game, look, when you're putting them on, this is how you take them off. It has to be in this order and whatever else. And I said, you're going to get it wrong. Try and not get it wrong. And everybody messed up to a degree. It's like, oh, that's the wrong way around, for the the second one or whatever. But for the first game, I had thread in my basket, and I kind of kept them in my basket until the point I wanted to make one of the tapestries and just moved them onto my needle. But going back through the rules after that first game, it's like, oh, actually I can only move thread when I gain thread.
Yeah.
But even though I have it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you haven't taken the opportunity to thread the needle. And yeah, there's a bit of a ludonarrative disconnect here, because it doesn't make any sense theoretically. I've got the thread, I've got the needle. Why can't I just put it onto the needle? But it does create quite an interesting timing dilemma, because unless you've threaded the needle, the final action space has limited opportunities to thread the needle. So it can be difficult to optimize your actions in the final space unless you've set things up in advance.
But not impossible.
Well, there are 2 opportunities, one of which is just taking a tapestry card with a thread on it. And if someone happens to put a thread on the one you wanted anyway, then you're laughing. But that's not reliable, Barry. It's not reliable. You don't know what people are going to do. That is not reliable.
Well, yeah, like it could be a balance thing. It could be a timing thing. It does help to elongate the game a little bit, but what it doesn't feel satisfying with is being able to create multiple tapestries in a single go. You can make a tapestry for one of your 2 actions at this final space, but if you have to then spend one of those actions to re-thread your needle by doing something else, whether that's putting something into scraps or for picking up a tapestry you might not even want just to get the thread. It doesn't really get any. There's no interesting chains. You're not really any more powerful at the end of the game than you are at the start of the game for this one.
No. There's no major sense of escalation beyond the and all of the beyond the acquisition, I suppose, of the commissions and knowing what you're doing, because all of the stuff you get that might feel like it's powered you up is temporary, right? Like a thread, like a needle full of thread in the right order, or a bunch of threads in your basket, or the equipment cards, or indeed you can hold the tapestries in hand until you make them, but you need to take an action to pick them up and then a separate action to make them. But you might go into that final action space with 2 in hand that you've set up perfectly, and you're like, I'm just going to blast out 2 tapestries. Boom, boom, made. But again, then you're back to square one with no sense of escalation again. So
there's nothing to. You don't get anything for doing it other than the end-game points. There's nothing you can get, I don't think, that's like every time you make a tapestry gain a thread or something along those lines.
Like that. And it's not a necessarily a bad thing, because the game is so short, but you know, it is it means that the game leans really much harder into the sort of the optimization of the worker placement and the actions round to round. So, you know, it's really focused on that worker placement, the tension and the timing of that worker placement, much more so than anything else, because you're not building anything, and well, except for a small tableau of tapestries, right? But again, like that's helping your score ultimately, but it's not going to give you any advantage during the game to do that same thing better.
Yeah. Like in terms of that power up, you know, the equipment that you can get is, as I mentioned, single use. The timing of using that equipment is also interesting. You can either use it before anybody's done anything at that action space, or you can use it as part of a resolution of one of your assistants, right? So that's your workers in this game. But even getting that equipment, in both my games, I went to that equipment spot once. I might have gone one more time, but I didn't miss one of the bust bits of equipment that came out. But what I've always ended up with is one bit of equipment that I want, because you take that face up, and then you get one equipment face down. So from a deck of cards, and then you put them into the 2 available slots you have. But you can never have more than 2 at a time, and you can never. You never know what you're going to get off that second one, right? So it could be something really useful, or it could be something you're never going to need.
Yeah. So
I've always got something useful, and then something that could be useful, but it wasn't immediately useful, and I kept it, and so I always never went back to that space because I have to be getting rid of something that I've got.
Yeah.
So to my mind, going to that space, the efficiency is getting 2 better things somewhere else. And if I had to give up half of that, then I feel like I've given up.
Yeah, there is. So it's a really interesting sort of situation where I think that at the end of the day, it probably is worth going to the equipment space to get one face-up equipment that you can reliably get that's going to solve some problem you've got. But there is a feel-bad element where you're like, I'm going to get an extra piece of equipment, and then I'm going to have to sack it off or sack off the thing I've already got, and that feels inefficient. So even though it's probably a bit of like it's probably a bit of like a trap, right? Like it probably is good to poach the one thing you really need and, you know, just sack off some, you know, the second thing it was a bit inefficient. But it still doesn't feel good. And that's partly, I think, you know, that's probably a bit of a compliment to the tightness of the action selection or action resolution in the game. But, you know, in practice, it feels a little bit bad. And we have seen a player also just luck into... there is a question, because there is also the timing window you spoke about that lets you trigger the equipment either before any action is resolved, so when the store turns on, and this allows you to play equipment on an action space that you might not have an assistant on, but also when you're resolving an assistant. And one of the equipment cards is refill the markets. The market doesn't fill till the end of the round. One of the equipment cards is refill the market and take one. And somebody just lucked into that. So they poached the one they wanted face up, then lucked into the reset and said, can I just use this now? And it's like, well, technically you're still resolving your assistant. I mean, you're done resolving the action, but it doesn't, there's no tie. The rulebook is not sophisticated enough to say, and once you've drawn your second card, that is the end of the action. You can take no action with those cards, right? So like that kind of tight timing isn't resolved. So you could luck into a card that lets you just refill the market and then poach something else you want. And that's going to feel way better than getting the card off the top of the deck that says, grab a brown thread out the bag. And it's like, I'm not doing anything with brown thread. I don't have a scoring for that.
Yeah. Although those are one of the few ways of getting a thread mid-build.
Yeah, those cards are, if you need them, absolutely essential. Like they're the only way to get a specific color that you desperately need reliably is that equipment card that says, get the blue thread out the bag and put it anywhere on your needle.
Anyway, the game doesn't go long enough that swapping in and out equipment makes sense. You don't get enough turns that you're fine to churn through them.
Yeah.
I've only played the game twice, as I mentioned. 2 players, 3 players. I think the most damning thing I want to say about Threaded is I don't think there's anything else to be seen in this game. Right? In my second game, I was slightly more efficient with getting my commissions early to then match into tapestries, which I didn't, immediately grok from the first game, or maybe turn 2 in the first game or whatever, and it only lasts 5-6 turns. My second game ended 3 players, 2 of us completed 5 tapestries, 1 of us completed 4 tapestries. The scores were pretty close, 37, 38 and 41, which was mine. I'm great. No, but the player that completed 5 tapestries only scored 37. The player that only completed 4 tapestries scored 38. So it's not that is completing more tapestries really helps. It does help, but it's not like that seems to be the only possible way of winning. But the player that did complete 5 tapestries and scored lower had the 2-point commissions. Mm-hmm. And so there's 5-point commissions and 2-point commissions. 5-point commissions require either a specific pattern or 2 colours in the same tapestry. The 2-point commissions only require a single colour, so you could do all 5 of your tapestries in a single colour. But it's entirely possible, if you're getting fewer than 3, then it's worse than just having a commission that matches 1 tapestry at 5 points. And if you're getting fewer than 5, it's worse than 2 tapestries that match a 5-point commission. So every time I've had a 2-point commission, I've tried to get rid of it.
Yeah.
The 5-point commissions are, I want to say, objectively better. It'd be very hard to score. You can't score more than 10 points, really, off your 2-point commissions. Whereas you could score 15 off a 5-point commission. But regardless, there's nothing I can get better at within Threaded. There's nothing I can do differently. I can't say I'm going to start out going for a particular love heart pattern or spades pattern this turn or the diamond pattern. I can't go into, I'm going to see what happens when I get the green thread patterns, because they don't give you anything unique. I can't go into resource generation to try and build up for a huge turn of getting multiple tapestries in a single go or anything along those lines. And I can't ever have more than 2 bits of equipment to chain into a big combo turn for that last round where I can catapult myself ahead, right? It's the same game every time, beginning to end almost for me. I don't know if you feel it's the same necessarily.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, I feel like there's sort of 2 distinct, almost not separate, but 2 distinct games in here. And one is this quite sort of interesting resource management worker placement game with a lot of tension, and I think it does that quite successfully. Possibly one of the reasons it's successful is because there's a lack of escalation or ability to work around the system. And there are other games that have found ways of making the system more compelling. I'll point to Bus, and I'll point to Bus, which powers up the action spaces, and Empire's Age of Discovery, which lets you get more workers and also level them up. But and obviously both, well, actually Bus isn't that much longer than this. Threaded, the thing is, for me, the core problem here is that the strategy, because you're dealt one face down commission at the start of the game. Now you can get up to 4 commissions over the course of the game. If you get a 5th, you discard 1. So that's what Barry's talking about. If you've got one of those 2-point commissions and you're not scoring it, or it's not getting you enough profit, you'll pick up a 5th and get rid of the 2-point one, right? There's no point in discarding them until you get too many. They're not doing you any harm. But also you get 3 threads and 1 commission at the start of the game. And of course, if you get the commission that's looking for blue and green thread, and you're dealt the blue and green thread, that gives you a little bit of a springboard into the efficiency puzzle of the worker placement, which might give you an advantage over other players. But, this stuff tends to... I'm not going to say... It doesn't tend to shake out. It might shake out, because ultimately, the best score is going to go to the person who managed to match up the commissions with the tapestries. And that's going to be down to luck of the draw, really. This is my core problem with the game, is that I think that it was probably the right decision to hide the scoring, so it's completely hidden, and you don't necessarily know how many points people are going to get. And this can lead to a surprise where someone ends the game, but might not necessarily have won the game. And that's good, because I think if it were mathematically calculatable, people would be doing a lot of math towards the end of the game trying to work out who's winning, and that would make the game too long, and it would drag. And who wants to do math in a game that's this light and otherwise quite punchy? But my problem was, in my second game, I scored 10 points less, despite taking the commission action more often. And that was simply because I was out of luck. I could not find any commissions that would sort of... I was scoring my two commissions primarily. I was trying to optimize the other commissions. Now, I do think the game needs some mechanism to stop the pure optimization of commissions. If you can magically sort of sync up all of your commissions with all of your tapestries, you will get the best score available in the game and probably win. So you can't be allowed to fully optimize this, but I think that it goes too far in the other direction where you can't really optimize it at all, and you kind of just have to hope. And that just means that the skill curve of the game is very low. You've got this sort of point where you've figured out sort of exactly what you can do, and after that point, it's kind of like, now you've just got to hope, And this leads to what we were saying earlier off camera, which was about this one action card, which lets you go into the discarded commission cards, because everyone's drawing 2 and ditching 1, and eventually the deck will reset if you've got a high enough player count. But you can there's a piece of equipment which you can discard at the beginning of that action step, or while you're resolving that action step, to go into that discard and poach a card. And that could potentially give you a run through of almost the entire deck, except for what people have already claimed, right? And you could poach the perfect commission for your setup. And what we've observed is that all the best scoring players in the games we've played, even though there are a small number of games, all the winning players have had that card, or the best scoring players have had that card. So really, the skill of the game is getting the exact right commissions, and there's only there's one card, or maybe 2 copies of one card, that let you do that reliably, and everything else is kind of a crapshoot. So despite presenting this really sort of high-tension worker placement game, the scoring doesn't actually really correlate to that. It just correlates to luck of the draw on the commissions, and that's quite disappointing.
Yeah, agreed. So I won that second game because I had the ability to bin one of my commissions to go and fish one out of the discard, which matched, the sort of the 3 tapestries that I was working towards. That the card I had matched nothing. That was either out or already I was working towards. So it went from... It was a 15-point piece of equipment. And in a game where you're only really scoring
30 to 40.
30, 40, yeah. It was quite big. And then the other one that was interesting, at least, was when you could build a tapestry out of the E phase. So from the ends and odds, there was a card that let you get rid of any threads that you had to build one for free from your hands. And that was used to relatively good effect by a player who built 2 tapestries the round before, still had one, but no thread, and so was able to use that to build their 3rd tapestry without having to need anything else, really. So it was there's some interesting things in there. They just don't really come together.
I was just smirking at the Euro game vernacular coming out. We're building our tapestries up here.
Yeah. Sewing or tapestries,
Yeah.
whatever it might
But
be.
I think,
But anyway,
I think that there could be I think there needed to be some other way. Like, even if there was an action on that final board that let you poach something out of the discard for commissions. Because the final, one of the things that's really interesting is the final board gives you all the best actions in the game, but you only get two.
mm-hmm.
Now, you can take two places in there, and I really like this. It is quite cutthroat because it does mean that if you're a player who's maybe a little less familiar with these sorts of games and you don't predict when the final round is going to happen and you don't take that really important, powerful action once, maybe you're not lined up to take it, maybe you want to do some commission hunting instead or get a valuable piece of equipment, you haven't taken that action. That's pretty catastrophic if the game ends and you didn't do it. But also, you could, if you don't take up your position there and you let someone get in there twice, that can also be really damning. So I do think like that final action space feels almost mandatory, and not taking it
Mm-hmm.
is probably not telegraphed as being as sort of big a decision as it is. Having said that, I really like how a lot of the really important actions are tied into it and forcing you to make these really painful choices when you do get in there. I feel like having four actions, I got two of the spaces in there, is almost too good. So maybe, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, maybe they needed to do something about that. But I feel like maybe tying in an action in there that let you do something with the commissions, like discard one from your hand to pull one out the discard or something, would have been better because it would just give you a little bit more control over what you were trying to do. But maybe it's just not trying to be that sort of game. But the problem is now this skill ceiling is so low that, as you said before, I feel like after my two plays, I've kind of seen everything it has to offer. If I want to get to a really tight, tense worker placement game with a group of people that don't have a lot of capacity for rules, this might be a decent choice. But the threading of the needle thing is a little unintuitive and a little overly complex. I think also fundamentally Tribune is a better choice.
It's fair. Well, you might be sensing a pattern that the game is not for me either. Two players actually, it just seemed to unravel. It was downright boring at two players. There was no tension, which at least came up a bit in the three-player game. And as I say, I think four players is probably going to be the tightest version of the game, or most contested for spots version of the game you're going to play. But at three players, it didn't live up to my expectations for that meanness, or for being able to find any new strategies in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so all in all, a bit of a so-so game.
Well, and for what it's worth, we're very experienced gamers, and so, I think that we're bringing that to the table. The four gamers I brought this to the table with they're not inexperienced gamers by any stretch. They're literally asking, "Can we look at the cube tower? Can we look in the cube tower? Is there a rule for that?" But at the same time, they're certainly not as probably as played as quite as broad a selection as you and I have, and they enjoyed it enough. Like it wasn't a bad time, but again, like I don't think anyone's rabid for me to bring it back out, and certainly
Yeah, same thing.
So not a bad experience, but we've seen all it has to offer after a couple of plays, and it's a bit of a pity.
Yeah, I will say the other players I played with, so it's three different players over the two games, or three additional different players. None of them were like, that's the worst game I've ever played. But similarly, nobody was like, oh yeah, let's go again. And I don't think they will be anytime soon.
Yeah, for what it's worth, our two games were back to back. So the 3-player game was just me and two players from the 5-player game again. And we had a nice time playing it a second time, but that second game for me was quite frustrating because I was like, I'm going to use all the things I just learned about the game to do better. And then I couldn't find the right commission cards, and I did much worse. And I was like, worse. Oh dear, I can't apply any of the things I've learned because I hit this hard wall of random chance that I can't overcome. So it doesn't really matter, Maybe the lesson I learned or should have learned, was that I need to care less about getting the right commissions because it's random and just try to end the game at the right time on my terms. But again, because all the scoring's hidden, because like I'm never going to know whether again, that's just going to be a different kind of crapshoot because I just don't know where my standing is. So I think my only viable route to victory is to maximize my score, which I can't do reliably.
No. All right, but that was Threaded. All right, shall we have a look at our other game of the podcast? Another one that we both played, and this was one we spoke about. We should have a look at which podcasts we've mentioned this in, but it was definitely pre-Essen.
Yeah, this was on our Essen hype list, and it was one that came out at Essen that barely anyone could get their hands on, but a number of press people have had it and covered it, but now it's at mass market in English, and so Byron and I have been able to pick up a copy and play it.
Yep, so this is Feya's Swamp. So originally published by Fractal Juegos and now published, I think in the UK at least, by Grail Games, probably in the US as well. Designed by Helge, I'm not sure, Helge Ostertag, right? So Gaia Project, Terra Mystica, and his brother Anselm Ostertag. And I have confirmed, I didn't know whether he was just mentioned because he worked on the original game this game is based on, which was Kawaii. As a re-implementation, but no, apparently he did put some work in on this one as well. He's not done many games since, is my point, but he's come back on for doing this one. The artist, very well known, Michalo Dimitrievski, aka the Miko. So you recognise his work from many of the Garfield games, North Sea, West Kingdom, South Tigris. Is there an East yet?
Do you know what? I don't think so.
Okay, they better get on that before somebody beats them to it. But Valeria, many more. He's a very well respected artist, and the art is
the Imperium series as well, right?
And yeah, Imperium Classics, Horizons, not Captain's Chair as far as I know,
No,
but
not Captain's Chair.
That doesn't count. So this is Feya Swamp, right? Another worker placement game. It's a territory building game. Players are competing to be the most prosperous civilization in the swamp. Players do this by building settlements. They go fishing. They trade with the villages that they make. They celebrate the days and explore temples, all working towards completing objectives, which scores you your points, which is our abstraction of how great a civilization you have managed to make. In the game, it should be quite familiar to players. So anybody that's played Kawaii will recognise the game, but I've not, so I can't really compare it in quite the same way. Yeah. But players are going to choose 1 of 7 out of 10 spirit guides to begin each round with. That's going to determine player order, give them a special ability for the round, and then they're going to be competing on these worker placement spaces for gathering resources, moving around this hex map. So you have ships which are going to move around and build these settlements, go fishing on certain spots. You'll compete to build your villages and your settlements as you go along, and you'll be choosing where those villages come from along 4 separate tracks on your player board, and as you put them onto the board, they're going to unlock additional workers, additional ships, the capacity for your ships to collect more fish or generate different income resources for you. You can also improve the movement of your ships or just get some points depending on which settlements you put out. The game is a little... Could be accused of being a little point salady, right? So it has 3 random mid-game objectives, things you can achieve during the course of the game. It's got 2 end-game objectives, which are different each game. Mix up the goals. They're all visible from the start. You can work towards them as soon as the game's kind of set up. Yeah. You have the option for playing asymmetric factions, or you can play identical factions just by flipping your player board over.
And you can actually use those in a mix as well, so you don't all have to play asymmetrical. You can play symmetrical and asymmetrical in a mix. I will just say on the topic of scoring as well, this is normally a point where I'd sort of chime in and say, and you'll probably get about half your points during the game and half at end game scoring or something like that. But I would say, given the nature of the objectives given that the objectives are functionally 5 cards dealt from a random pool at the beginning, and those 5 cards are quite distinct in terms of their scope, I don't actually... it's hard to give an assessment on whether this particular game of Feya Swamp will be one where you score a lot during the game and a lot at the end. There is a lot of opportunity to score points during the game, but that could be very or not very consequential compared to endgame scoring based on the endgame scoring cards.
Yeah, and we'll come back to what some of those might look like, but they very much shape the nature of the game you're playing, which
Absolutely.
I think is interesting enough. Not every game is going to be the same thing. You can't do the same thing every game because you might not be working towards those objectives, which may or may not constitute scoring 75% of your points or 40% of your points. So it can be quite a big swing. But yeah, choosing which of the tracks to take your settlements from to unlock things, and the asymmetry of it. You've got the same things on those tracks, give or take, but the order in which they happen changes and matters. So it's not as if your faction have their own specific player powers, but they might focus on a certain element of the game earlier than other players will, because it's further along their tracks. You might have your fishing capacity increased early. You might have income tracks that you might want to unlock early to power other elements of the game. Thinking about what matters in this particular game, the first one I mentioned, that spirit guide selection, right? It's super important. There's 7 spirits out every game out of 10. You pick one of them, and that can define your strategy, not just for the round that you're in, but also for, again, what's available to you throughout the game, or potentially even like scoring strategies, as some of these leaders will score you points in the nighttime phase. So it might be that an early boost of income, you take the guy that generates money, and that's going to help you build your villages, your settlements in that first round, which will power up some of the tracks, which will give you more income for that. Might sound like a no-brainer. Oh, okay, I'll go for that. You might, however, think, well, actually, looking at the position of the board, I want to do this point scoring. I think I can get 15 points this round by cashing this guy in, which is not insignificant. It's not that much, but it's not insignificant. It could be up to 60 points over the course of the rounds. It could be a leader where it's going to let you reserve an action just for you, which will let you focus on another area of the game out of sequence from where other players would have to target it, and maybe that's going to score you more points. Maybe there's a big celebration that if you can keep the build space for later, you can come back to it and you can score that celebration early without missing out on building for that round. So all of this is balanced with 3 other aspects on that leader card, the guide card. So it's your turn order in the round. So they have a number 1 through 10, and the earlier the number, or the lower the number, the earlier you act in the round. So it's variable turn order. Those leaders also determine your basic movement for the round. So can your ship move 1 space, or can they move 5 spaces? And that can be very meaningful depending on where your ships have ended up and what fishing's available for the round, because the location on the board matters for that. And it also determines what your additional build cost is. Some leaders are better at building than others. So getting somebody that builds for cheap, typically they don't move as far. And somebody that moves quite far but can only build is much more expensive for them to build. So balancing or understanding what you need for the round and which leader is going to give you what you need for the round, even if you don't need the ability, maybe you need to go first that game. Even if you don't need the building, maybe you need the movement. There's a lot to weigh up there, and it's fairly interesting I'd say they're much more meaningful or much more impactful than the bonus tiles that you get when you pass during Terra Mystica or the boosters in Gaia Project.
Yeah.
But functionally, they're kind of...
Well, the mechanism is the
similar.
exact same, but the difference is that this is much more consequential.
I mentioned the map, so you have the swamp that you've got to build out into, and there is this movement element to the game. And so players are forced to interact with this map in a way that's quite interesting. So again, not like... I'm going to keep comparing it to Terra Mystica because it has a spiritual... It has its home in there. Between Kavai and Feya Swamp, there's Terra Mystica, Gaia Project, and Age of Innovation, all of which do something a little bit different. But with the game only being 4 rounds, the game is only 4 rounds, I should have mentioned that. Each round, only 1 or 2 of the 3 types of fish on the board are able to be caught. And each fish is in its own third of the map to some degree. So if you want to fish and you're up in the yellow section, but next round there's only purple fish available to be had, then you have to make sure that your movement can get you down to that bottom half of the board, and maybe you've not built anything down there yet, and maybe your boats don't move that far yet, you've not built up your shipping track to get those additional moves. But the positioning of where you're at, what you're working towards, and what you need to get on any given round is also pretty important in this game, I would say. I'd say the map in this is much more crucial than it is in the other games that I mentioned.
Well, I think what's interesting, particularly if we're comparing this to Terra Mystica, is that in Terra Mystica, the positioning is a lot more limited. And, you know, I think one of the mistakes you make early on in Terra Mystica is that you place your opening settlements too close together and they form a single town. Forming a town in Terra Mystica is a big points bonanza when you get enough buildings close together. And then you've got one town and you have to have developed your shipping so you can sail away from that town to build something somewhere else and build a second town. In this game, the buildings are locked into the islands and there's this sort of natural logistics to the actions. But at the core of them, and I think you're about to talk about this, but at the core of them are the fishing boats, which, if you don't have a lot of movement, are incredibly restrictive because you need your boats to take the actions. You start with 2, and you can place them far apart, but then based on what you want them to be doing, that may be a boon because they're distinct, they're separate. It may be a hindrance because they're too far apart. So it's not like Terra Mystica, where generally starting with your settlements more distant keeps your options open later in the game. In this game, if your ships are far apart, this could be useful if you need to get to different fishing spots. It's also problematic if the fishing spots are restricted. You can't get both your ships to the fishing spots. You can fish less fish. The action's less efficient. But simultaneously, if you want to be building on lots of different islands, which are spread out across the swamp, having your ships in the same location makes that much more difficult. It's so simply by having a lot more movement, you're a lot more dynamic. You can be a lot more dynamic, but that usually comes with the consequences of later in turn order or much higher building costs or rubbish power.
Yep. And the movement of those boats is key because you build your settlements from your boats. You fish from those boats. So a lot of the action, you trade from those
Every
boats.
action
right?
is boats.
Correct, everything tied into that. You can only move your boat when you perform the associated action, so building, fishing, trading, if you can do that action with your boat. So if you, let's say you're low on money, you want to take a build action, well, the build action comes with a free move for your boats, but if you can only build with a single boat, you can only move a single boat. Your other boat doesn't get the move and then not a build. So it's very difficult, or it can be difficult if you've not planned ahead, to get your boats into the right place. It could be that you want to do the fishing action, but you're too far away, and so actually you take the build action first, and you move your boats halfway there with your first move, and then your second move gets them to the fishing. And so it's pretty... positioning is key, and as Mike mentioned there, it could be key for a number of reasons, both towards working towards those objectives and for the things that you need to do to power those objectives, because trading not only gives you the potential for points, but also can power, well, mostly powers your economy when you're delivering fish to other players' locations. So if you might be fine building your settlements away in the corner on your own, not that the map's necessarily big enough that you can get away with that, but if there's nobody there to trade with, you're never going to get enough money, and when you run out of money, then you can't build more settlements. So everything's interlocked. There's a balancing act for each action that you might want to do. I will say there is a free move space for boats, which will let you move without doing anything, but that is also the action that lets you move onto temple tiles to get additional points and bonuses around the sort of outside of the map, and you would normally want to be doing that if you were going to be taking a free move, which often moves you further out from where the action might be. So
yeah, the temples are very far away from anything else useful. They're just spots where if you sail to them you get points, but it's also a high demand spot. I mean, I've only played this at 4 players, so I don't know how the worker placement feels at other counts, but at 4 players everything feels excruciatingly limited, and really I want to have my first action set up by whatever I did last in the previous round so I could just get going.
Yep. So I believe, so I've played it 2 players and 3 players. I think you've only played it 4 players. The 2 players, there are some dummy settlements in the swamp. There's a different side of the board. It's smaller, fewer islands to begin with to keep that kind of tightness. But, there's only 3 spaces at each station instead of 4. So there's always somebody typically that can double up on an action in a turn, which is not true at the higher player counts. Particularly, 4 players specifically. 3 players has the same thing. There'll be a player who probably can double up on an action if they're there first, although there's costs associated with going there later on. But you have to account for that, right? As part of your planning, it's like, well, I'm going to take the lower value leader this turn because I want to do fish deliver fish as an action, or fish deliver, whatever way you want to go about it. Speaking of fishing, like coming back to the map being important, you can build on top of fishing spots, which can also kind of work towards freezing players out. So this whole movement system and the what's the word I'm after, like the butting heads, right, with what you're doing, there's a high level of interaction between or can be a high level of interaction with what you're doing and how that impacts the next player's turn. So playing in the 3-player game, for example, all 3 of us started on one of the double islands for setup. However, players 1 and 2, we went to build, and player 3 was locked into a low movement space and couldn't get out to build because we'd built around their starting tile where their boat was, and it's like, well, I can't get there because then I'm going to join up the other islands. So you can't join up islands when you're building. And so they were kind of locked into where they were. They had to take an action to improve their movement before they could take that, and it really impacted that first turn.
Yeah.
So just all these sort of interwoven systems that kind of come together, and they're sort of mostly player driven, and you can mostly account for when somebody's going to do them or not, but not always. And yeah, just, I don't know, quite interesting there.
I feel like, so I don't know if we'll come back around to this, but we can talk more about this later on, but I feel like the build action is without a doubt the single most important thing in the game. You know, it unlocks all of your powers and it gives you points. You know, at the end of game scoring, even excluding the asymmetrical cards that might come out, the core mass majority of the core points come from scoring settlements. So you want the build space is designed to be the most contentious, most desirable space. And so not getting in there in turn one, not unlocking any of your extra ships or workers or incomes on turn one, massively consequential. And I think that, and certainly um, if you were unable to capitalize on this in your first game, you won't make that mistake again.
No, agreed. And so I think there is sort of there's the potential for the meta to evolve. The leader is the number one spirit guide, and they claim a spot for themselves that only they can use at any point during the round. But because you're also acting first, you can claim that first build spot, and you can take a build action. So you can guarantee yourself 2 build actions. But in a 4-player game, that's also going to freeze somebody out of a build action unless the build leader also comes up. So the game can be mean.
But it's mean in the same way that Terra Mystica or Gaia Project or even Castles of Burgundy is mean. You know, it's mean in a way, you took my spot or you took that thing I wanted. You know, we're not deliberately attacking each other, and actually when players have tried to sort of deliberately block players out, it's very sort of situational, the opportunities to do that. By and large, it's usually, I can't afford that action now because you took the spot I needed, and now it's going to cost me 1 mana more, and I don't have that, you know? So if I do want to go in that spot, I have to sell someone for mana, and now I don't have a worker, and that's going to mess me up in this other way. It's cost me 4 points, you know? It's that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. But I do think, I do worry about that being a thing in the future. But I need to play more times, because being locked out round 1 from building, super devastating.
Yeah.
But I found the biggest layer of player interaction has been around the economy and scoring points. So catching fish is important because you then deliver it to these villages, and if you deliver it to yours, you get nothing at the time. But if you deliver it to other players, you get money.
Yeah.
And so the first fish gets you 4 money, 3 money, 2 money, and then once it's got 3 fish, they're all happy. Everybody's got fish. But what can then happen is once these villages have fish, is there can be a celebration. So that's one of the actions you can take. You can have a celebration at one of these islands. And you pick an island and you get a point for every village that has a fish. Then you'll get a point for every one of your fish, or every fish at one of your villages, but then so does everybody else. So you're getting 9 money by delivering 3 fish to your opponent's village, but they're maybe getting 3 points out of it. So the trade-off of what you're doing there, building up a good celebration island for yourself, where other players may or may not want to trigger it, is debatable. Like, they can take some of your points by having a celebration on your island, right, where you've loaded up your fish on your villages, ready for points, and players are like, well, if I let you have it, you're maximising the use of that, but at least I'll get 5 points and you'll get 15 or whatever. But I'll get 3 bonus points for having the totem there, or 3 points for taking that action first. So it's kind of a balance of needing the money, earning points, and are you going to get to trigger that celebration first, or have you made it too appealing for another player to kind of swoop in and get the lower number of points rather than you taking it all?
Yeah, so I mean, the fish celebration is the main way to earn points during the game. There is the fish celebration and then the competitive objectives that are dealt out during setup, which are first come, first served with diminishing points as the game moves on. You want to try to do those if you can. You don't need to do them to win the game, but that depends on where points are available elsewhere. So a lot of it is going to be about reading the setup and understanding where the bulk of the points are going to be coming from. But the fish celebration is an interesting dilemma because you want to, for example, maximize money by selling 1 fish to many of your opponent's settlements. And again, you're looking at what's adjacent to your boats, and that boat positioning is important. But the first fish you sell to a settlement is worth more than the third fish, and then that's it. You can't sell more than 3. So by spreading the fish out, you maximize your money, but you also maximize the points on the islands for whoever triggers the celebration. It's an interesting dynamic. However, I have seen in both of the games I played that largely it seems the fish celebrations, even when we are incentivized to make the celebration more enticing for people to poach or steal, they're still largely deprioritized. Like, people are typically looking to improve their shipping, their ship speed or build, or even fish before they look to trigger the celebration.
Certainly in the second game I played, celebrations were a bigger part of my strategy. In as much as I didn't have to deliver fish for money by unlocking an income early on, to then I'd get my build every turn with the money I had, and then I could focus on getting points via delivering to my own villages, celebrating, rather than fishing and delivering. But again, it just might have been the game that we played. So the real variety in this game, to my mind, is from these variable scoring conditions. So what you've mentioned, the end game and the in-game scoring, and they can be, from what it looks like, quite different on a game per game basis. If one of the early objectives is to deliver 30 golds worth of fish, then you want to build up your fishing, or build up how many fish you've got before delivering to the islands for money. If that ties in with catch 7 fish, okay, well, I'm going to focus on fishing, I'm going to get these early objectives, and then I'm going to work on using that money to power my building or whatever there. So you try and get your third ship, you try and get your shipping capacity up, and score those points. But it could be, there's objectives for increasing your sailing track or unlocking your extra workers. Well, which one do you work on there? Probably you focus on unlocking your 2 workers, because then that gives you 2 extra actions every round, and then you can try and get your sailing track up. But if you've got an objective that's have 1 settlement at each island, or 3 at 3, do you focus on 1 at each, or do you try and build the 3 up and then spread out into the other ones? There's a lot of variability there, and I think that the variations in those goals also change the value of those spirit guides, the leaders you choose at the start of the turn, what's useful. Ideally, well, maybe not even ideally, but the end game points can be significant depending on what's come up, and they can be contradictory to the objectives mid game. So you often have to decide what it is you're going to focus on.
I mean, I think so. In our first game that we played, there was a real synchronicity between the end game scoring and the mid game tiles, and they all synced up quite nicely, so the sort of scoring path forward felt quite apparent. In the second game, the mid game scoring tiles were completely ignored by the winning players. But eventually completed incidentally, but not prioritized, because the end game scoring was so significant.
Might come back to that, but again, I don't know how long your 4-player game took. Like, I'm finding this is playing in 60-90 minutes at 2-3 players. I don't know if it went any longer at 4 players.
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, again, like both games I'm playing with brand new people who've not played it before, but they are my sort of heavy games group, so they're pretty adroit at this sort of thing, and they suffer in varying degrees from analysis paralysis.
Right.
I think, we did manage to get through a 4-player game in, I think a reasonable expectation would be 2 to 2.5 hours. Maybe a bit longer if someone's suffering from AP.
Well, I'll maybe try it, but so yeah, my games haven't gone that long. That's why the number on the box is always always both wrong and too short.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this says 90 minutes per player. No, it doesn't. It says 90 minutes.
No, it doesn't.
Sorry. Now, generally, I prefer a per player. Of course, that can be misleading. If a game's simultaneous, the game time doesn't actually change with additional players. But I think that 90 minutes, I think half an hour per player is pretty reasonable. I think, if you're doing a teach, if you're having some setup, another 30 minutes for setup and teaching's pretty much, there.
Yeah. And I don't think this game's too hard to learn. I think it's quite neat, but really relies on that player interaction to make it great. Like, if you don't have players that are going to actively try and interact in quite the same way, and I don't think you can really get around it, to be honest, but you'll get some players that like to turtle a lot more than others, some players that just like to do one thing. I think it benefits from players getting involved where they have to at the time that it makes the most sense to do so. So there's a few negatives I have about Feya Swamp, and primarily it's the rules as written in the rulebook, right? They're not as clear as they could be. I think they've been translated from German, and there's a couple of aspects. First game played a bit wrong, specifically only the spirit tiles and printed totems that increase your build cost, and not every tile that was on there, so economy was much tighter that first game. Ships have to be adjacent to the island they're building on. So there was a couple of times when I, in that first game again, built from the middle of the ocean into an island, but you have to be beside it to begin with.
Right, yeah.
The temple water spaces, you can use them as part of a normal move, but if you read the rules, it says moving into them stops you, and you can only move into them via the free move action, but that's only if you want to stop and get a temple tile. Mm-hmm. But the way it's written, it sounds like you have to stop every time you go in there, and you can't go in there as part of a normal move, but you can. The game mentions, I don't know if you've got the rule book there, that some action spaces provide a bonus. So that first fishing space provides a bonus fish.
Yes.
But that icon is nowhere in the book.
Huh.
And so it's not immediately obvious. Same on the temple tile that give you like 2 bonus fish.
Yeah.
But you're picking up those bonus fish at the time. But again, I didn't immediately clock that every time you went to the first fishing space you got a bonus fish, because the icon's just not in the rulebook.
Yep, I see exactly what you mean. Yeah, I think this is sort of one of those things where, I think that we make a lot of assumptions, and it's because the rulebook's not explicit, it would be very easy to assume incorrectly. And if you were to come into the rulebook for clarification, you wouldn't find it, and that's disappointing.
Yeah. There's just a variety of things, and even all these sort of everything I've just mentioned there isn't collated in one place on Board Game Geek either. It's across the threads where the designers come in and clarified what it should have been. I think it's just been a mistranslation. It may have gone from like German to Spanish into English. Mm-hmm. Kind of that chains caused some problems.
Yeah, I think Fractal Juegos are Chilean, I think.
And one other thing that it's not a big thing, but a lot of the time I've knocked my player board. Just a little bit. So all your little villages are in these little slots around the outside of your player board. And if you knock it, they all just move out a little bit. And you spend until it comes back to your turn again, pushing them all back in to the thing. A double layer player board would have been useful there just for neatness. But the game's also quite cheap, right? So not having a double layer player board, and particularly one that's a double-sided player board, so it'd be a triple layer player board, probably help keep the games down, the cost down. Sorry.
Yeah, we had a few moments
for a game
where
that's
people were like, "Oh, where's my settlement gone? It's not on the board. Oh, it's fallen off the table."
Yeah, you can clip them and knock them onto your lap, certainly. And then another thing, again, not big, but the game's really good looking, right? The different tribes, the different factions are interesting. The whole vibe is interesting, but there's very little lore, right? Not that you really need it, but if you look at the rules, there's like 3 paragraphs of you are swamp people pleasing Feya in our swamp. And that's it. That's all there is to it.
Swamp.
Yeah, you got to worship Feya or whatever to bring the most celebration and goodness to the swamp. But it's very.
And it does. So I think there's a little bit of lore at the front of the book about how like and it's very like colonial coded. And I don't actually know if Kaivai or Kawaii or whatever we're calling it. I don't know if that was. I don't think that was colonial. I think it was based around. I want to say Polynesian exploration, but I'm not sure of that either.
Yeah, so Kauai's near Hawaii.
Okay. So. But what I will say about Feya's Swamp is, in the opening lore that they've written, it's very much like these 4 civilizations arrive at this completely unpopulated area, which they're now going to build upon, and then it goes on to say, like, whoever builds the best civilization is going to be marked the winner. And it's very, like, colonial coded, even though I'm not even sure if the original game was a game about certainly not European colonization.
No, I don't think it was. I mean, I've been watching. I never finished it. What was the Kamehameha Jason Momoa program? Chief of War. It's on Apple. So it's only 1 season, I think, just now, about King Kamehameha and bringing together the people of the Hawaiian Islands. Kind of thing. So I think there was a lot of war and stuff there without European involvement. But the game is otherwise, like, I say it's quite root worthy in its presentation. I could see that this swamp has legs for multiple games to be in this world, and it's very interesting. Again, particularly for the art from.
Yeah, much like
Miko.
Kyle Ferrin in Root, the Miko's art is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, and you do get a sense of character despite sparse flavor or written lore, which actually is my preferred way of doing it. Let the components in the art deliver a sense of context rather than overwrought written word. And it's just there's nice little touches as well. Like, you've got these neutral workers that are all axolotls, and then each faction, there's frogs and crocodiles, there's turtles and salamanders, and they're all unique little meeples as well, which is nice.
Yeah. So the games that I've very much enjoyed. Everybody's wanted to play it again. The opportunity for doing something different. I've got some ideas already about where I want to start a strategy. The last game I played, one player went in early for unlocking both their workers, sort of round 1, round 2. I think maybe got them round 1, and I didn't unlock my workers until the end of during round 3. So I was like, I'm going to fall behind here on action economy, but I moved up into boats and shipping, and I did a lot more gathering of fish and selling fish and doing the sort of celebration actions. I then managed to get up end of round 2 into the 20 money income track, which seems like it's quite good as well. And then that powered the rest of my game, because I'd already kind of pulled ahead a little bit in the economy. And then they'd focused more on the temples, and it all came together. It was pretty close, and maybe 10 points between us end of the game, both having gone sort of in a different direction. I will mention the player that came last was the player that we boxed in that round 1, and they didn't get a strong build action off. So it's definitely something you've got to account for it.
Yeah.
And as I say, I wonder if the leader's out, the person that goes first getting a double build's maybe too strong if it freezes out player 4.
Well,
hard to know.
Yeah, and I would expand on that a little bit, just to say that what I've observed in both of the games that I've played, is that whoever built the most won the game, you know? And where it's been close, it's because people built roughly equal amounts of things. And I do think that the blue faction has a slightly bigger advantage towards that, because they can get their first worker very quickly. And they get their first worker very quickly out the gate. That's the blue faction's power, is they unlock a worker much earlier than everyone else. And so in games where the players aren't overly conscious of how critical build is, the blue, I think, faction has a bit of an advantage. And certainly I'd be cautious about, because functionally the way the setup of the game works is that you pick a random order for players to pick leaders, and then the leaders they pick determine the turn order once the game begins. And the leaders come from a random pool, so you might have the number 1 leader, which would always go first, and you might have a slightly different spread of numbers, with the lowest number being the first player. But so you can make an argument that if the blue player gets to go first and potentially get double builds and get a better action economy because they unlock their first worker much quicker, and they can beeline into one of the better economies on the build track's early doors, they should not have been allowed to go first. But that's only if they're not first in leader picks, right? So what I'm saying is that you would have had to have a player be given the blue faction and then allowed to choose the first leader, and then no one had a chance to block them. Whereas if they're maybe 3rd or 4th in that pick, other players then have some agency about picking lower numbers to take the first slot, so blue doesn't get to go first. But I haven't played enough games. Certainly, no. Certainly blue was incredibly potent in the first game we played, because nobody fully grokked just the sheer power of build, and were somewhat distracted by other things that gave more immediate feedback. In the second game we played, blue didn't fare as well, despite still coming out to a strong start, but that's because the player with blue overlooked an incredibly consequential scoring card until it was too late.
Which is fair. Yeah, I do. I had already started to wonder if there should be a snake draft of player color leader. If that might be something worth considering, because I would, if I were yellow, I think I'd try for the double build and move along that top right track, and I would so yellow gets to choose where its powers go to a degree. There's spaces that you can put different tokens in. I would put the plus 5 money on the same track as the plus 20, and try and rinse that turn 1 to then be able to build everywhere else. So
then you don't need to worry about money. You can just quite reliably build constantly.
Yeah, so then I would want... so if I was yellow and was able to take that double, or the leader to guarantee a double build, then I think that's a strong...
And what I will say about this, actually, to be sort of fully transparent, is that I have this instinct about what might or might not be broken in the game. And in that first game, I was the blue player, and I was exploiting the fact that I discovered that build was way more important than everyone else quicker. And I think I might have actually got 3 build actions off in the first round while everyone else was messing around upgrading their stuff. And I just won, pretty much by round 1, by simply dominating the build spots. It might be the case that I got 2 builds in the private build action, because I picked cheap build as my opening lead,
Yeah.
or cheap build, or that maybe the leader that has the private build spot also is cheap. Anyway, the point was I got an extraordinary amount of builds, and I beeline to that 20 income in the first
Yeah.
game, and then I never had to worry about money again. And after that first game, I was a little deflated. I was like, this was very easy to, and I didn't really have to worry about fishing, which seems to be a core part of the game because my economy's sorted by this money I'm getting in the income phase. In the second game, I decided to change it up by trying to see if I could go into some kind of fishing strategy and make most of my points during the game. And that was quickly undermined by a very consequential endgame scoring card that came out. However, what I will point out is I then pivoted to building once again for most of that game, but I never unlocked the 20 income and I made all my money by fishing. So that 20 income, I think, is a spot that I look at and go, that's completely broken. But actually, it's not, and you don't need to unlock it to necessarily do very, very well. So it's one of those games I think where like there seems to be a lot of sort of broken powers and broken opportunities, but it's also a very short game that escalates very quickly and doesn't ever stop escalating. And that's why build is so consequential, because the game just, the minute you start putting out settlements off of a track, you start unlocking stuff, and then it just, it's just a solid acceleration from there, which is why it feels so bad, like your friend in the first game who got boxed in, when you just even if you miss building one or two settlements in a round, you're like, bloop, and then you're almost like, I'm done. Like that was it. It's like a drag race almost, where you just went, it just didn't quite work out. And then you're like, I'm out tempoed now, and that's me done.
Yeah, it's what, like, they weren't totally boxed in. Like one of their two starting boats couldn't, they only had a one move, couldn't move and build without joining two islands, which you're not allowed to do. So he needed that second move to move out over the space and build back in, and so had to spend an action to do it. But yeah, it was just really they were actually winning after turn one. They were 10 15 points clear after round one, but because they'd underpowered their engine going into the next 3 rounds. So an interesting thing, like there's a review on Board Game Geek who sees a lot of the same things that we've just talked about, but comes sort of different conclusions about how the game's got more problems than benefits type thing. But they came in on workers, unlocking your 2 workers being the best strategy, and in most worker placement games that's absolutely fair. If you get more actions, you can take more actions on any given round, particularly in this game, because if you're the last to act, you get to put down a spirit tile, which can is additive for points, makes it more expensive for people to go build there. There's a lot you can do with that, and you get to move the totem. But then, consensus has been that 20 income spot's potentially better to race towards if you can get a double build turn one.
Well, I think that, and what's interesting, the point about the workers is that each action triggers potentially all of your boats. So I think you could make a really strong case that getting your 3rd boat as quickly as possible is better than having another worker, because 2 actions triggering 3 boats is 6 actions, 3 actions triggering 2 boats is 6 actions. And also the worker placement spots get increasingly more expensive. So even though you've got 4 workers potentially, you're going into the more expensive spots. You might not be able to afford to use them. You get to sell 1 for a mana. It's not very efficient. So, I think I feel like when I first looked at the game and I was applying sort of general Euro heuristics, like getting the workers early is always really good to do. When I stopped to think about it, I was like, but that's cracked. And actually, if I do that, that's cracked. So I do feel like the game feels quite broken in a number of places, but I think that's intentional.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if somebody said, I've figured out an optimal path forward. But also part of me thinks that the 3 competitive scoring objectives and the 2 endgame scoring objectives and their degree of synchronicity or non-compatibility is so consequential that mapping an optimal path might be really, really difficult. Because it's like we were saying earlier, the fish party can be super profitable points-wise, and the way that synchronizes with the objectives as well. Like, I do think this is a game that might be quite, and this might be to its detriment, but this is a game that might be quite decisively determined by who read the sort of strategic path through the scoring route from the setup most effectively, you know?
Yeah.
And then just executed on that scoring optimization, you know? And then it just becomes a game of sort of tension between the players that have observed that path competing to optimize it and the players that have sort of missed it and are still doing the sort of the nice things that get you some points. And then, you know, at some point they twig and go, oh, but I've not been focusing on that thing you guys are doing. And now I'm locked out.
Yeah, I mean, but that's fine, I would argue. I think we need to talk about that one objective that is has the potential for scoring at least 100, if not 150 more points than any other objective.
So there's one end game objective that seems to double the available points compared to every other game. But, you know, but one thing I would say as well is, like, you know, even in the first game I played, there were a number of cards that incentivized building one settlement per island. And there was, I'm trying to remember exactly which objectives we had, but certainly, despite the fact that I probably won that game because I revved up my engine super fast in the opening round and that was just, you know, sort of twigging that building was going to be more profitable in the end than anything else, you know. There was an alignment of objectives there that I perceived. And so there was a course through scoring those objectives that helped me to make the most of the acceleration. And so I was able to hit those competitive objectives slightly ahead of everyone else. You know, in the second game we played, there's an endgame scoring objective which looks at your largest contiguous area of settlements and just squares it. So if you have 2, it's 4 points, you know. If you have 6, it's 41 points, right? 36 points. That's
36, yeah.
I don't know.
Mike's not in charge of the maths on this game.
Well, and that was part of it as well, actually, because I was playing against somebody who's a mathematician, and we'd arrived at the same conclusion, which was that the most important thing to winning this game is going to be building the largest contiguous area of settlements. But where they were doing math to work out sort of what was going on, I was not. I was just like, I just know this is good, but I'm not actually going to sit and do the math because I don't really want to do math in games. Like, I can, and I'm good at it, but I don't enjoy that, you know? Like, sitting and sort of micromanaging math is not my favorite thing to do. So, you know, if the game starts asking me to do that, that's when I find it less enjoyable. This is why I'm not into the end of Power Grid, typically, right?
Yeah, that last turn.
The last few turns of Power Grid. But, you know, but what I mean by this is that, I mean, it's kind of interesting in a way because the scoring sort of criteria in both games felt quite different, but I actually ended up having quite similar net results. So I'm interested to see again, like in future plays, how much these 5 randomized objective cards affect the landscape of the game. Because there is this sort of quite tight sort of worker placement, action economy, resource management sort of base system there. And then these 5 things that are just throwing spanners in the works, you know, to shake things up.
Yeah. I think for future games, for mine, I'm not going to add that squared area objective because the upper bound for that is whatever 18 times 18 is, I suppose. Right, which is a lot of points. 324.
324. Okay.
324, right? So whilst you shouldn't ever really get that, but that's like the upper bound. Two of your islands have to be somewhere else.
Well, wait a minute. Do you have 18 total settlements?
You've got 20 total
settlements.
Okay,
so 18 is the upper boundary, yeah.
Yeah, 18 is like, so 324 points. Every other objective has an upper bound of about 60. And so the difference between those, if you're left unchecked, so for somebody to not notice and not go for it, is well, like I've not even scored 324 points in any of my games. So,
and my best score was 424, I think, in that game.
yeah, but a lot of them came from that objective, right? So
almost, more than half. No, actually, slightly less than half, but still,
slightly less than half.
From one card.
So it skews. It has the potential to skew the game in a way that the other objectives don't.
Yeah.
And so I think it'll be more fun without it. And I will say as well, on that card it says squared ×2. Do not do that. The ×2 is a mistake. It should not be on the card.
Well, in the example, it shows them squaring, right?
Yeah.
But, I think so. But I think, what's interesting as well is that, the competitive objectives have 15 points each, I think, for first place. So collectively, they're worth, if you were to first place on all of them, which is difficult to do, you would then be roughly tied with one well-scored end game objective.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that there were the other endgame objective that came out that we sort of focused on. One was 5 points for every island. There are 9 islands. 5 points for every island where you just have one settlement. And so that became like a 40 point thing where everyone would build one settlement on 8 islands and then just hyper focus one island, which is kind of the same as the squared thing. Like the end result's kind of the same. The other scoring objective in that first game was 5 points for every settlement you built that was next to a temple. But you have to build out the temples, and not a lot of people were doing that because they wanted one settlement per island. And you have to really commit to an island to make that worthwhile, because the second settlement you build is actually losing you a bunch of points. So then you need to build more and more and more, and then eventually you can build out to the temples if you want. But the other thing is the way the core scoring works for the islands is at the end of the game, you're going to count up all your settlements and multiply it by the number of spirit totems on the island. And so having a big settlement is somewhat incentivized by the core in-game scoring anyway, provided you can successfully add a lot of spirit totems to that island. So you could make an argument for spreading out to many different islands, or at least several different islands where your opponents are putting statues, so that you've got some nice spread amongst the islands with, multiple statues. But I do think it's easier and potentially more achievable to sort of hyper focus your settlements and then just drop like one totem in there, I do think also it seems, and maybe this doesn't play out, I've not comprehensively looked at everything, but it does seem to incentivize also, or rather, I think the objectives seem to reward sort of, well, actually, no, I might cut this out because I genuinely don't know. I was going to say reward a bulky settlement, so a chunk of settlements, but there's some objectives that are like 3 settlements on 3 islands, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, an objective that might encourage spreading out, provided it's not alongside 5 points for one settlement, because, functionally, if you're getting 5 points for every island with 3 or more settlements, now you need to build 2 settlements on 3 islands to get the same net result. So that is, and that's what we're talking about earlier when we said that being able to read the sort of path through the opening flop of objectives is absolutely critical.
Yeah. I could see, maybe like you mentioned, if both those objectives come up, you ignore the 3x3 and you use the remaining actions to go pick up temple tiles. Yeah. Right? So rather than focus on getting that 3x3, you've freed up what you would otherwise be having to focus on to try and get points elsewhere. Or maybe you do it on the fishing and the celebrating. There's things going on here. The game does warrant more discussion, I think. I think the game's lighter than Terra Mystica, Clans of Caledonia, Gaia Project.
It's got less resources. It's certainly lighter than Gaia Project. It is lighter than Terra Mystica. It's got less resources to manage. It's got less of a chunky economy. It's got slightly less versatility. Certainly it doesn't have as many actions. It doesn't trigger action. I mean, the actual turns feel quite similar because on your turn you just do an action and then that's your turn.
Yeah.
But the actions available to you are far fewer.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if there is. So there's already an expansion in the works, as far as I can tell. There was a Stork faction being made, so that as part of this expansion, I do wonder if a layer could be added to the complexity to give the variation that the games just mentioned might have, because the asymmetry within the factions is quite surface. Though does have an impact, but like eventually, if everybody had unlocked everything on their board, it's going to be pretty similar.
Yeah.
It's really just the order in which it happens for what you're doing. So I'll be interested to see what an expansion might do. I don't know how you found the game at 4 players towards the end. So at the end of our 3-player game, there was times when there was no good actions to really take.
Yeah, I'm sort of ruminating on this, and I feel a bit like I can understand. So I feel like that might definitely be true to an extent. I also feel like it sort of falls a little bit into that Euro trap of you're looking at the board and you're like, oh, I could do this, this, or this, and they all kind of get me to the same place, you know? Like I'm going to get 5 points or whatever for each one, you know? Or I do this, it gets me 6 points, but I pay a mana and that's a point at the end, so it's functionally the same. I do think that certainly in the last game I played, the very high scoring game, I built my final settlements with my final action, so I had sort of made very good use of those actions and felt like I had something useful to do right up until the end. I think in a perfect world, I do think you probably want to be building settlements as much as possible. Of course, it is about the viability of having access to those actions, you know. And typically with a high demand space like build, of course, they're going to go early, but you can get your private build space potentially. You can get one blocked off with leader. I don't know. It's it's definitely. I think actually that was a round where I'd bogarted a build space with the leader token and then taken a build action early doors and then wrap back around to it at the end of the round as well. So certainly I think that's going to happen, and it's probably going to happen if you've been blocked out of stuff by other players.
Yeah. Like I certainly ended on our 3-player game that the last player had sort of 2 actions still to take, and there was just nothing that was terribly beneficial for what they were doing. They couldn't deliver and get enough money to do like that final build because they didn't have the berries or the gems or whatever
mana.
they are.
It's actually mana.
Secondary.
Is it mana? Okay, it is
like
called mana. There's some sense of magic in the swamp. We don't know.
Okay,
they do look like berries, though.
They don't taste like berries.
Crystal fruits. It's actually meth.
And so it was just kind of, I don't know, interesting. But
one thing I will just say very quickly there as well. You reminded me of something, and then I immediately forgot it. Oh, yeah, I was just going to say that at the end of each round when you pass, the first person to pass gets current choice of the guides, but they also get a first choice of a set of bonus tokens. In the last round, those tokens are just immediate points. So there is some... I'm not going to say compensation for passing early, but it's kind of like an incentive as well, where you're sitting there going, well, I can dick around taking some more actions, but maybe it's worth just passing first and getting the high points token.
Yeah, the swing there's potential, 8 points between first and last passing there. But if you pass last, you also get to place the spirit token, which if you've built up a big island can be more than that 8 point difference. Yeah, you'd
need to have an island where you had like sort of 6 to 8 settlements, I think, to make. I mean, the reality is you're going to know whether or not you're in contention for passing last already. Even at the start of the round, you're going to be able to tell roughly whether or not you have enough actions. And typically, also, if you're last in turn order, you're higher chance of passing last.
Yeah.
But it will be dependent on, do you have temporary workers? Do you have mana? How many workers have you unlocked, etc.? So, there is all of that. But yes, there is a nice big token for passing first. And so these are things to consider as you're trying to eke out actions for a few more points.
Well, the couple of games I've had of Feya Swamp have been interesting. The players I've played with have had a good time as well. The possibility of doing different things next time and seeing how the game shakes out with different objectives is interesting to me. So it's definitely one I want to play more of. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you're hoping to get this back to the table again.
Yeah, I've enjoyed both plays of it. They've both felt, sort of quite tense, and it's definitely quite an unforgiving game. So, I've seen sort of players getting, sort of like the chagrin as they realize sort of partway through that, strategies aren't playing out. And so, it's nice. It's good to have some tension. It's good to have some player interaction. So I do like all of those things about it. I'm interested to see how sort of varied it feels after a few more plays, Mm-hmm. Having, I'll say as well, in both games we played with the asymmetrical player powers.
Yeah, I've only played with the asymmetrical sides as well. The game's not quite a splutter, right? Mm-hmm. But there's only 4 turns, and turn 1 matters. Mm-hmm. And so if you've not picked up on what you should be doing with your first couple of actions, it can really set you back.
You start with 20 gold, so you can take a build action immediately. Just do that. And unlock something. Don't build 2 settlements of 2 tracks that don't unlock a thing. Unlock something with your first build action.
Strategy advice. And make sure you can. Like, make sure that your leader will allow you to move to a place you can build. They should do. Like, even if you're only move 1, and you'll have enough money to build. Because if you've put yourself at the 2 6-cost tiles and you've taken a builder that costs 5 and you can only move 1, that's the wrong place to be.
Yeah. For sure.
Keen to see where it goes. I keen to see a few more games. Keen to see whether enough games against comparable opponents make this game shine, or make it apparent that actually you're somewhat at the mercy of turn order. Mm-hmm. More than anything else.
I mean, that could be an interesting sort of experiment as well. If I replayed with the islands or square card and everyone was sort of conscious of just how incredibly consequential that is. Mm-hmm. If we're all trying to do that, is it still viable, and how does that play out?
As I mentioned, like, I didn't have the sort of runaway or the lack of interaction. So players getting up to the 13 tiles in a single island just wasn't viable for us, because we were trapped at the top end because none of the purple fish came out. Mm-hmm. And so all our building initially was at this top end of the map, which eventually led to being unable to continue building on the islands without joining them up. So you obviously managed to carve out a bit of space for yourself in different places, which is possible, but I think if every player's aware of it at the start, it's definitely much more likely that you could keep things penned in, and you'd have to expend a lot more to try and do something like an 18.
I don't know if it'd ever be possible to get to 18, right? I got to 14 and it felt like that was... To be fair, though, that was 14, and my first unlock was not a good choice. So we will, we could see sort of how things... I mean, I really think possibly the best first choice is the ship. Just get that 3rd boat. But you're right. There is, again, like, part of this analysis of the opening setup of the opening flop is which fish are going to be in season. For those of you that are struggling to visualize it, there's functionally just 3. Imagine the swamp board. They're divided into those sort of 3 broad sections with different colored fish. And each round, 1 or 2 of those areas are going to be viable. and that changes as the game progresses. So that's about managing that economy. If you've got a lot of cards out that have 2 areas turned on most of the time, it's probably going to be more of an afterthought. Whereas if you've got some rounds with only 1 area or several rounds with only 1 area turned on, it's going to be quite tight, or consistently the same area throughout. That's going to be incredibly tight. So that's going to be interesting. So it's interesting talking to you and hearing how these things have shaken out differently as well, which is, reassuring. I do wonder how viable it is to take aggressive actions, because so much of the game is about this accelerating tempo, and it's really going to be about sort of incidental blocking. I think, like, I need to build this settlement. I could build it here or I could build it there. If I build it there, it potentially hampers someone else. So that's the better choice. But I feel like people are always going to do that anyway, if they can. But I don't think, taking like skipping a move 1 round, skipping a build 1 round to just try and block someone else out. I mean, I think you'd be better off taking a build action and then just building a single settlement just to block someone else from the build action or make it more costly. That'd be better in a way.
Yeah, but don't forget that people can't build on a space where your boat is.
Yeah, that's true.
And the other option for blocking is looking at where they can deliver to. And if you can get there, even, decide that I'm going to deliver to my own one, so I'm not going to power their economy. There's a lot of layers to interaction. Now, whether it all comes together in every game, that's what's, I think, still up in the air, right? I think in some games it's going to be, oh, that was sweet. That was a really good move. That was, I'm so mad. And other games it might be inconsequential. And it's going to take more games for that to shake out, I think.
Yeah, and we've certainly seen some of that. We've certainly seen people doing a thing, or going, well, I've got to, like, I've done it. I've been like, I got to sell fish right now, even though I'd like to fish first. Because, if I don't sell the fish right now, you're going to sell the fish and you're going to take all the top spots. And then there was no point in waiting anyway. And so there's lots of those nice interactions. But whether or not what I really mean is whether or not there's significant competitive play to doing really sort of suboptimal things to block other people out. I don't know. Certainly, maybe in the 2-player game. I don't think so in the higher player count games because you're potentially just king making the person you're not interfering with.
Yeah. All right. So 2 games that we have played and may play some more.
Well,
let us know what you think of the format, I suppose. Do you want us to go into these sort of deeper dives into games and give your thoughts individually on them? Or would you rather we covered a broader variety of games where I'm just like, that was awful? Next game.
We could potentially fit in a rapid fire round,
Yeah.
But this sort of review where we've both played it and we're spending functionally like an hour talking about each game. Maybe that's not what you want. Maybe you just want it. Well, no. But like the thing is,
tell us.
But Barry and I both like Feya's Swamp, right? Like we're both interested in it. We're interested in exploring more of it. But I don't know, maybe these deeper dives, these deeper analytics sometimes don't convey as much enthusiasm as these sort of like quick reviews where we're just like, that was great, this is rubbish, that's it, But
we don't not making any good TikToks here.
Yeah, exactly. There's lots of I think there's lots of great content creators on TikTok. So we'll stick with the thoughtful deep dives for now. But also, do let us know what you like, what you'd like us to cover. We will, of course, be somewhat restricted by the fact that whether or not we can both play them, whether or not we have access to them, and that's not just about whether or not Barry wants to buy a game that I've got or vice versa. It's also about whether or not you can get a game, because sometimes we back stuff and then you can't get it anymore.
Yeah. Things arrive and it's like, oh, have you played this? No, I didn't even know it was out.
What is that? Oh, well, it's unavailable now. But yeah, let us know your thoughts. We've got sort of various things on the horizon, but certainly we were talking about a Nippon review. If you're interested in hearing more about that, let us know in the comments down below. I was talking about World Order, but Barry hasn't got a copy, and I don't have a copy, actually. I'm playing someone else's copy. So that's something we'd have to try and organize, but Barry's not even interested in playing it, so...
I'll play it once, but I don't know. I don't see it being a.
And I think that would be an easier ask if you even knew someone who had it. But it's hard to say,
correct, yeah.
Barry, go out and try this game for the podcast. If Barry doesn't even know anyone that has it, he's not going to buy it. I wouldn't ask him to buy it. So
I'm sure somebody in some club near me, right? North London. There's got to be
there's got to be someone with
Somebody will have it
a
somewhere.
copy of World Order. Yeah, interesting. Well, if you are interested in hearing a review of World Order, let us know in the comments down below. If you don't tell us, we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not true. We're going to keep doing what we want instead.
You can't stop us.
But you can influence us with your feedback, so do let us know. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you for coming on this wonderful board game journey with us. We'll keep making content, and our preferred way to fund that is through the Patreon, where we can be maximizing the output of the content we want to create. So thank you everyone so much who supports us on the Patreon, and we love you all. We'll see you in the next podcast. Bye for now.
Bye.